Stop sending the IRCC a pile of documents. Don't be the next person just to take all the records that you've found out there, even from legitimate sources, and staple them to the back of an application and say, here, you figure this out. It's a mistake that I see a lot on the various wild places out there on the internet where the wild things roam. Someone might be spending weeks, months finding birth certificates, marriage records, baptismal records, census records, immigration documents, obituaries, family trees, newspaper clippings, all other sorts of evidence and hints that aren't really quite evidence. And then they put everything together into a big folder and essentially say, here, you guys figure it out. Here's everything that I found. Therefore, I'm Canadian. That's not the same thing as presenting a case. Now, I'm not a legal official, and I'm not talking about the legal side of things. This is just genealogist to researcher pro tips. If you're dealing with complicated Canadian citizenship by descent situations, and by definition, most of you are, that distinction matters. I'm Dr. McHale, and I'm Canadian by descent, and you might be too. I'm a professional genealogist specialized in historical document research and analysis. I help people locate, interpret, and organize the genealogical records they need to demonstrate direct descent from a Canadian ancestor. Please note, I'm not a lawyer nor an immigration consultant. Nothing I provide is meant to be construed as legal advice. I do not provide or advise on I do not provide any advice on legal proceedings or applications related to citizenship procedures. I'm a genealogist and historian who can help you with the research and compilation of the genealogical records you need in a professional way with less hassle, more clarity, and peace of mind. So there's a fundamental difference between providing evidence as such, here it is, and presenting that evidence effectively. Evidence is the material that supports your claim. A birth certificate is evidence. A baptismal record is evidence. A marriage certificate, a marriage record is evidence. Census records are evidence. Immigration records, newspaper articles. A genealogical database entry is not really evidence, but it's a good hint that can help you find evidence. But none of these documents by themselves, or even together, really explain your case. That's something that still needs to happen. Think about it this way. Imagine I hand you a box containing 50 documents, birth certificates, marriage records, census records, church records, immigration, and these documents are in different handwriting. Some are printed, some are 200 years old, written in faded ink. Sometimes the names are spelled differently. Dates don't always match. Some records use middle names, some use a first name. All of a sudden, there's a father of the bride marriage certificate that uses the guy's fourth name because he's from French Canada, and he's all of a sudden Narcisse when his whole life he's otherwise been known as Jean-Pierre or John Paul. And somewhere inside that box is the evidence establishing the relationship between you and your Canadian ancestor. All the material might be there, but imagine I'm the person reviewing that box. I'm looking through that box. I have to figure out what it is you're trying to prove. I have to figure out which documents relate to which person. And when that person goes by different names at different times in their life, that's far from clear. I have to work out why the discrepancies exist, what they might mean. Can they be explained away, or do they represent real problems with this lineage case? I have to determine which documents establish which relationships between individuals. Is John Henry the same as Henry John, or is that his son or his grandson? I have to reconstruct the chain from the Canadian ancestor all the way down to you. And that's a terrible way to present a complicated case. It's a terrible way to present a simple case. I don't even let my university students get away with something like that, presenting a semester term paper. And it's completely unnecessary. Instead, and this is just generally good advice for the care and handling of bureaucrats, you want to make the logic of the case you're trying to demonstrate as obvious and clear as possible. Anybody you're submitting evidence to should be able to understand the structure of your argument without having to become a forensic genealogist themselves. That's why I recommend thinking of your submission almost like a professional research report. Once you have all of your records compiled and the supporting documents, start with an executive summary at the top. The purpose of this executive summary is in plain language to explain who your Canadian ancestor is, who you are, and how the two of you are connected. What's the basic storyline? Not family drama, but the vital statistics details, the vital records details that link them to you in a very clear and coherent way. After that, give them the roadmap. This is where your cover sheets become extremely useful. Didn't think about cover sheets? Every piece of evidence, good best practice, every piece of evidence should have a cover sheet that explains what that document is, who it specifically relates to in your lineage chain, and what that document establishes, ideally in relationship to other documents. So instead of dropping 10 documents together into however you bind them, staples versus paper clips versus neat little plastic sheet envelopes, that I don't have a dog in that fight. But the organization of the content itself is what really matters most of all. Instead of dropping 10 documents into a binder together and expecting someone to understand their significance, you need to create a clear section for each generation and each evidentiary question. So, for example, you've got a Canadian ancestor, their child, their grandchild, their great-grandchild, and finally little old you. Each section of pieces of evidence, each section of record documents should make it immediately clear what you're establishing and which documents establish it. Label the evidence. Don't write on the thing itself, right? You're supposed to have something that's clearly not tampered with, but put a cover sheet on it. A cover sheet that says, here's the document, here's what it does. Don't make somebody hunt through 45 pages looking for the one line that matters. Don't make somebody go cross-eyed like a magic eye puzzle trying to discern a baptismal record in French of the mid-19th century, handwritten across 2 or 3 pages, or a census record that's long faded with time. Trying to find out which line is the one that relates to your person, especially when there's 3 families on the same street with the same last name because they're cousins. Identify the particular document, the person, the line. If it's a census record, where is that line? If it's on a birth record, okay, you're looking at pages 52 to 54, starting here, going to there, that kind of thing. If a particular document establishes person's date and place of birth, name that. If the document establishes the marriage between 2 people and their legal name change, identify that, name that. If there's a discrepancy between this census document, and their birth certificate, then explain the discrepancy, address it, at least be able to identify it, and don't just pretend it doesn't exist. This is especially important with genealogy because history records are messy. People change their names. People went by different names at different times. Names are often misspelled. Dates are recorded incorrectly at times. Sometimes people fudge the dates. Maybe Great Granny lied about her age on the census record when she was 42. It happens more often than we'd like to admit. Immigrants use different versions of their names. French name, English name, back to French again. Clerks make mistake, clerical errors, right? People themselves sometimes don't know their exact birth date, or the village where they're born sometimes just kind of merges into the bigger metropolitan area. None of that's unusual. The problem isn't necessarily that there is a discrepancy. The problem is leaving discrepancies unexplained. A well-organized genealogical lineage proof case with any sort of, wherever that might apply, Canadian citizenship or otherwise, says, yes, you will notice that these 2 records spell the surname differently. Here's why we believe they refer to the same person. That's dramatically more persuasive and, frankly, just professional good conduct than simply putting both documents together into a pile and hoping nobody notices or that they have the good sense, after 7 hours of going through these documents for 25 other people, that it makes obvious sense to them. No. There's another reason why good organization matters. You're not trying to overwhelm the reviewer with evidence. You're trying to give them the right evidence for the right proposition to answer the right question. More documents doesn't automatically make a stronger case. Now, I'm not arguing for it, go with as few documents as possible, but they need to be organized. Sometimes just piling more and more things on there can make a case harder to understand rather than easier. If you've got 12 documents establishing essentially the same fact, you need to explain why you're including all 12. There's got to be a good reason for it. If I'm looking at it, I'm assuming there's a good reason for it. You need to make that obvious and clear to me. That said, if you just submit one document that establishes a single fact and there's no other corroborating evidence, that's a weak case. So you do need to provide enough records, enough evidence to support a particular fact. This person's birth date in this place, for example. Now we've got, if you've got one excellent primary record and 3 weaker secondary records, don't assume that just putting them together makes the evidence stronger. What makes a strong evidentiary case from 3 or 4 different records of varying strengths and reliability is the coherent explanation that you can provide to demonstrate how they relate to each other. Evidence isn't valuable merely because you find it. And contrary to popular myth, the data never speak for themselves, because data is plural. The data never speaks for itself. It always speaks through the interpretation of the scientist presenting the data. And that's true for genealogical evidence. It's not obvious to everybody what the link between this record and this record are. That's why providing labels and providing clear explanations, by labels, I mean a cover sheet with a name, a label saying this is what this document is, this is what this document does, and here's the specific line that's relevant. It's valuable because it establishes something relevant to your case. And what makes it relevant to your case is your ability to explain that and to show that connection, not with more words, but with more concise, clear, simple words. So when you're preparing a Canadian citizenship by descent application, or rather, when you're preparing your genealogical evidence packet, which you might utilize for any number of things, including and not limited to citizenship by descent, don't ask yourself solely, have I collected enough records? But ask yourself, can someone who knows absolutely nothing about my family and my family history understand my case based on these records in the way that I've organized these documents? That's a much better question. And this doesn't mean you need to produce some enormous 50-page legal brief. On behalf of all good, well-intended people everywhere, bureaucrats included, please don't do that. A good presentation is often the opposite, a lengthy presentation. That's why I'm going to be wrapping this up shortly. A good presentation is about making complicated information simple to follow, a clear and concise executive summary, a clear structure, generation to generation, a cover sheet for every piece of evidence, and logical organization, clearly labeled evidence, and good, brief, simple explanations for discrepancies. And a straightforward chart can always be helpful for showing how one generation visually showing how one generation connects to the next. You're not trying to make the application look impressive or thick. It doesn't matter how many kilograms it weighs. You're trying to make it easy to understand, because there's a huge difference between saying, here, all the records I found, and saying, here is the case, specifically, this is the evidence, and here is exactly how the evidence establishes each part of the case. That's the difference between submitting documents and actually presenting a coherent case for lineage. And if something like, for example, Canadian citizenship by descent depends on a complex legal genealogical chain, the difference can be enormously important. If you've put together your documents but want an expert eye to look them over to ensure consistency, clarity, and coherence, hey, I can help you with that. I can also help you compile your records into a professionally organized proof case so you can submit that evidence with confidence and peace of mind. Go ahead and reach out to me at the link below.